Hello, and welcome to the Old Farm Bus Podcast. This is the back of the bus session.
Hello and welcome to the Old Farm Bus, Back of the Bus Sessions podcast. I am buzzing for this episode. I've got a mate on here with me. He's very, very inspiring and has inspired me in so many Before this podcast, I've got to say, we've been going for about an hour and a half, and then eventually one of us had to say, should we record something now?
Try recording?
I'm a bit gutted that I didn't press play, because that was all good shit.
Yeah.
Now...
It's going to be boring.
It's got to be downhill. We've spent all the energy.
Yeah, the only way's down, Mike. Yeah.
But I'm going to welcome aboard Jay Ped.
Thank you very much.
Mate, you basically, I feel, on me in 20 years' time. I hope so. I keep listening to you and looking over and going, please let me grow into that man. He's so cool. And I've openly said this to you before as well. You were somebody at the gym that I kept crossing in fleeting moments.
Yeah.
I think I rhymed it before, didn't I? Passing in. Oh, it'll come to me.
Yeah.
When I press play, that's it.
Yeah.
But we'd always sort of pass one another. And because you're the nighttime gym guy, I didn't really get to speak to you because I'm rushing home at night.
Yeah.
But in the days, I try and sort of pick people out and have conversations. But when I'd look over, I'd just sort of see this big, strong, dense figure and think, oh, yeah, if I went and spoke to him, it would be probably a gym-orientated conversation. And then one day, because my mate James was sitting next to you, I was like, oh, I've got a bit of time tonight. I'll go and just hear what they've got to say. And within 10 minutes, I was like, oh, my God, who is this man? It just absolute beautiful and wholesome, and the conversation was wonderful.
Yeah.
But have you gone through your life sort of being judged and having to sort of maybe fight for your position to be listened to?
Yeah. Well, you said it earlier, didn't you? You judged a book by its cover, really.
1,000,000%.
I suppose from sort of secondary school, I was picked on. I didn't have the best of things, as you don't. I grew up in a family of, the various scenarios meant that we didn't have a lot. So, and this being sort of Ripley, it was called a scrubber and this, that and the other. And I had to sort of mould myself in a way that meant that I softened the blow, as it were. So I think I befriended. You when you start at school, the teacher puts you in with the kids who are who aren't the ones who aren't achieving very well. You want to hang around with them, and certain other kids go, you want to hang around with these. Come and hang around with us. Don't hang around with them because they're the naughty boys. But I made an allegiance with the naughty boys because it meant that it deflected from me. So being tall, not having the best trainers at times, not having the right coat, I was a focal point, and everybody zoned in on me. I was one of the tallest in my year, and I only got bigger, to be fair. And
at the start, that was causing a lot of unwanted attention.
Yeah, it was. Kids are cruel when they want to be, aren't they? And I was at a new school, and the school I'd been at previously, because we moved around a lot when I was a kid, and we finally settled, and I was able to finish my education at Ripley. But the school I'd been at previously, I was judged by the haircut that I had. I was judged by the size, how tall I was. People would call me names and so on and so forth, and that just carried on. So rather than retract back, I sort of branched forward and said, I'm going to just be with these guys then. I mean, certain other things came from that. And then I got older, got bigger, and, when I'm at the gym, I wear a vest top. I'm at the gym. I wear a baseball cap, but not a lot of people would picture me in a shirt and tie, which is what I wear at work.
I mean, on most platforms now, you can watch this. So on Spotify, they can watch it. On YouTube, they can watch it. But for someone listening, what is your weight and size?
I'm 6'3" and 22 stone.
Wow.
Just under 22 stone.
So people can at least understand, on my perspective, why I would look at you in a certain light and be like...
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
I wonder what that guy's alignments are. I wonder what his interests are and where he sort of faces.
I mean, people who see you at a gym see you at a gym.
Yeah.
They don't see you in the other aspects of your life,
Yeah.
do they? People who see you at home don't see you at a gym. People who see you at work don't see you at home, don't see you at the gym. And I think underneath the surface, you're still the same person, aren't you? It's just that you've got different aspects of your life. People who see me at martial arts don't see me at the gym, don't see me at home, don't see me at work. So there's all the three aspects to me that other people aren't really aware of, or other than my size, you know. And there is this misconception, preconceived idea that being big and broad means you're a bit dumb.
Yeah.
And I'm not.
And
Well, I don't think I am anyway.
Well, that's where we ended up having the conversation, was about the work that you do. And we're not going to go fully into that until way later on in the podcast.
Yeah.
But can you just say the job title as well?
Yeah,
what the role is?
I'm a manager. I work for Child Protection and Children in Care Services.
Wow. And you had to work your way up to that role, or did you go to uni and you sort of got given that role?
Yeah, I mean, it's a job that you need to be university educated for. I started my working life as a welder, which I hated.
See, that's more where I thought you were.
I hated it, Mikey. I hated it. I couldn't stand it. It was cold. It was dank. It wasn't where I wanted to be. And I think right early on, I had a inclination to work with other young people who perhaps had a similar grain running through their life that I'd had. So I went back to college. I left school. I didn't finish school. They allowed me to do some of my exams, but I didn't. In all the leavers photos in the school book, I'm not in there. Yeah, I wasn't allowed. Yeah,
I think we're going to get into that.
Yeah,
too.
we will do it at some point. Yeah. So, and then I sort of got involved with. I went back to college. I was just doing sports. You know, it was the only thing. I didn't really have any qualifications, so started doing sports, and from that springboarded me to being a mentor. I was quite fortunate with my background that I got given certain sort of I want to say status is the wrong word, but once people. So I was a mentor for the Derbyshire Police, for instance. I got a job with the Derbyshire Police working in their sport versus youth crime stuff, Sport 2000 as it was called then. And I dropped a clanger once and said, I was talking to a group of young people and said, well, actually, they were going, what do you know about it? I said, well, I have a similar background to you. I've done drugs and I've been a naughty boy.
Good man.
And, the manager at the time was like, we didn't know this. And rather than, it was touch and go for a bit because so why didn't you tell us? Well, you didn't ask.
Yeah.
And then it was because it was an initiative that meant people who had got a bit of a disadvantaged background were being worked with. I got afforded opportunities and to go places. I think I was interviewed on the news about 3 or 4 times. And from there, I became a mentor for disaffected and kids on the verge of offending or re-offending in the city. And I wanted to do more. So I did.
And mate, that's kind of what I was alluding to with the conversation we had in the gym.
Yeah.
That is my passion.
Yeah.
Like young people, particularly behavioural challenges and very disaffected young people.
Yeah.
Is where my heart lies, and just for young people to do better and find passions. But when I was listening to you talk about it, you had that same enthusiasm in your voice, and that passion was just sparking forward. And I've not heard it for a long time, especially in this area. It's often the case where you talk to somebody about young people and it's just of this really negative, low energy frequency vibe that they're giving out. Oh, they're just acting up, they do this, and it's not digging deep and thinking of the why and then building and what if. Could we do this? Could we do that? Initiatives of it. And when I was just listening over, it was so exciting for me to see someone in the local area too who has this vision, who has this belief and has this potential in them. And I want to find out more about you as a person and where that sprang from.
Yeah.
And then we'll get into sort of the initiatives and things you've done in your life.
Yeah.
And then end your way up to where we're at now. And maybe we'll talk of future ideas. Who knows?
Possibly, yeah.
We're on
possibly.
a podcast, man. That's what we do.
Why not? Let's go for it. Yeah.
I'd love to go back and talk of Jay. Little old Jay Danny, you know what I mean? Because I feel... Now I've met you, I've listened to you on Jamie's new exciting
What's
adventure.
wrong with you? Yeah. That's what it's called, isn't it? What's wrong with you? Yeah.
What's wrong with you?
Yeah.
And I've listened in and heard so many avenues of you. The one thing I just haven't gone to is who you were as a young person. And I want to find out about that life.
I mean, I was quite, don't get me wrong, I was quite privileged in a way up to a certain age, sort of 7, 8 years old. You know, my parents both worked. My mum had part-time jobs. We lived in quite a comfortable lifestyle. I got an older sibling, older brother, who's 3 years older than me. You know, I was taught manners, respect for my elders, the rights and wrongs. So I had a bit of an imprint. So from, I'd say, birth to sort of 7, 8, you know, the imprint on me was to be respectful of your elders, was to say your pleases and your thank yous and all that sort of stuff. And you know, I was quite fortunate comparatively to some other young people, you know, at that age at that time when we were talking, you know, the mid 80s. And then it all fell apart, to be fair. My father, go on.
I was just, in that time period as well, so you and your brother, it was a really quite close-knitted family. Was it like fairly archetypal in the sense you'd go away together,
Go on
be
holidays,
close together? There was nothing that you could imagine reflecting back to that was sort of like microcosms of trauma or anything going off there?
Not. I mean, it's hard to remember all that time ago. I mean, my father always had a relationship with alcohol. Always had a relationship with alcohol. His father had a relationship with alcohol. So it was second nature for us as a family to be around alcohol. You know, and parents be at the pub, and we go to the pub on a Saturday or a Sunday lunchtime, or a Friday night or whenever. So. Yes, there was, but it was managed quite well. Both parents had work, you know, the money was there. I make the distinction between alcohol and heroin, to be fair. If alcohol was invented now, it'd be a Class A drug, it'd be legal. It has more damaging effects on your body than heroin does. The reason heroin users look the way they look is because they're using all their money on heroin and aren't buying products and aren't buying deodorant and brushing their teeth and eating properly and so on. Similarly with alcohol, you know, because my parents had they didn't have a lot of money, but they had money. They had jobs, so the finities of life were still there. You know, you had your decent Christmas presents, you had your birthday presents, you had your holidays, you visited your grandparents every weekend, and you had those involvements, and then it just came crashing down.
And I'm going to go to the crashing down. When you said they taught you respect, I was imagining the discipline in that. Would there ever be violence in the discipline, or was it just a sort of firm understanding, no, you need to be respectful, you know?
I mean, this is the 80s. So my mum had a rubber bottom slipper.
Cool.
So that hurt.
yeah.
You get that across your backside. You weren't going to say it again. Yeah.
Because I want to go to the crashing down part, but then that is an interesting part as a parent and the discipline side and the 80s mindsets.
Yeah.
Are you nuanced in the smack in the bum, using a slipper, showing a little bit of violence there, or do you think that's got no place in the world or necessary in any form?
I don't think it's necessary. I've never hit my children. I've never threatened to hit my children. I've never used volatility and aggression to discipline my children.
I'm glad you said this, by the way. I was setting it up, but I was hoping it would go there.
I think, but it was a different world then, you know, and I think my father, he was caned at school. You know, you got the cane across the hand. You know, physical discipline was quite normalised. you know, all the way through to probably the mid-90s, to be fair, when it was quite clear that if you were exposed to levels of volatility and aggression to a degree, you had a predisposition, like you say, nuanced into doing it. And I've never been that. My you know, I have a look that I give my kids, you know, and if my daughter, she's nearly 18, she's nearly an adult, bless her. My Emily, Maisie's nearly 10. Both know that I've got a look, and if I go quiet, they know. You know, it's like, oh, I've really cheesed that off now, because and they probably, that's
There's
more
strength in silence, though.
There's more impact there than anybody can, you know. And I've never been an aggressive individual. Anybody can push and shove, and anybody can hit somebody smaller than them to make a point. You know, why? There is you learn more by having it explained to you why something isn't correct, or why something's not proper, and what perhaps the impact of that behaviour will be, rather than just,
yeah,
what's the point?
I'm of a complete agreement there. And I think it's that person that's allowed it to get to that boiling point. It's something more underlined in them that they need to get through and work out through their own clumsiness and struggle, and not impose it on the kids. And I don't think it needs a place at all, violence, because it does perpetuate it. That's how mum and dad did it. That makes sense to how I deal with my conflicts and inner feelings and pain and struggle.
Well, it's a family script,
Yeah.
isn't it? Your script, you know, I mean, each family has a number of scripts dating back to grandparents, great-grandparents. They did it, we're going to do it, you're going to do it, your grandkids are going to do it.
It takes some strength to have to break that script, though, and rewrite it.
I'd say, but I don't think my brother's never hit his kids either, you know, and you know, so he doesn't do
But
this.
it's got to be a conscious decision, though.
Absolutely.
Sure. Yeah,
absolutely. You know, I think I've raised my voice at my children a handful of times. I mean, Emily, say Maisie's 10 next week. Emily's 18 in December. I see the look on their face when I have, and it crushes me, to be fair. I don't want them to be scared of me. I'm the figure that they're supposed to look up to. I'm the trusted person. Why would I want them thinking that I'm anything other than somebody that they can go to and trust? And if by raising my voice or slapping their backside, for instance, will break that trust, I don't want anything to do with it.
I can't picture or imagine much beauty comes from fear-based responses.
No.
It does seem like the greatest art, the greatest inventions come from this flow state and that love inside of your nature, where you're so passion-driven and excited about something. It all gets created from that and it flourishes. But to be fearful of something and not make them leaps is often where we make the worst decisions in our nature. Yeah,
it's a fight or flight or freeze, isn't it? Fight, flight or freeze. You're either going to fight back, you're going to run away, or you're going to freeze on the spot, you know. And I wouldn't want any child, let alone my own children, I wouldn't want any child. And in my work, I've seen hundreds and hundreds, probably thousands of children in that situation. I don't want that for mine. I want my children to know that there is a consequence, that understand that you can learn from behaviours. You're not going to learn anything by fear. You stop processing. You stop processing the information around you. Shut off. And how can you learn then? So I don't want that, and it's not something that I've ever done.
So let's go back in the timeline then.
Yeah.
And you said all fell apart. Now that sounds fairly dramatic.
Well, it was.
And that's why I want to go into it.
Yeah.
You can go as far, deep, and however you want to go about it.
I remember when it started. I remember where I was, and I remember I was playing out with my brother, actually. We lived in Eastwood at the time, and I remember my father always had a relationship with alcohol. And my mother did as a result of that, because wherever she went to the pub, she went, and then we went, you know. But I remember his father dying. They lived with us at the time, and my grandfather was a lovely man, and my father really looked up to him. You could tell that, and he had cancer, and I remember seeing him in hospital probably 2 days before he died. And I remember my mum fetching us over from playing out. We weren't too far from home, and I'd have been probably 8. And yeah, she'd said that my grandfather had died, and I just saw the change in my father pretty much immediately.
Really?
Yeah, yeah.
Did he have a breakdown in front of you, or?
I mean, I've never seen my father cry.
Yeah.
To be fair, but I saw him cry that day, and that's how profound an impact it had on me. I don't think I've ever told him this, to be fair. So if you're watching, Dad, but I saw him cry. He lost his father, you know, and then he went through my grandmother, her Parkinson's, so he went through all that.
Wow.
And she lived with us as well, you know, and the relationship that he already had with alcohol just got worse. And I always look back on photos. So I see photos of me and my dad when I was sort of 3, 4, 5, 6, probably into 7. And my dad was quite you know, fresh-faced, dark hair, quite I wouldn't say slim because he's a big guy anyway. But
Athletic build?
yeah, I'd say so. Yeah. And then I see photos of him probably 18 months later, and there was a photo taken, I remember it was the back of a pub that they used to go and drink in Eastwood. And his hair had gone grey in 18 months.
Seriously?
Seriously, his hair had gone grey.
Was he out every night?
I wouldn't say every night because he still held a job down at that point.
Wow.
But you'd lose them for a weekend.
Yeah.
Me and my brother were just left to our own devices. You know, you always knew where they were. If you wanted anything, they were at the pub.
Yeah.
You know, and I always remember that sometimes they'd have parties at the house, and the house would be bouncing. And that was his cope. That was his script. That was his script. You know, and he started to cope by way of alcohol. He can only do that for so long before the money runs out. When the money runs out, you have to find ways of getting money, or you don't have any, you know, and then it takes over your mind, plays havoc with your health, plays havoc with your mental health. And yeah, it's a recipe for disaster. I like that term. It's a recipe for disaster, you know. And we lived quite a comfortable lifestyle, in Eastwood. And within probably 18 months of my grandfather dying, we'd moved. I'd had to change schools, left all my friends behind. Then we did it again. You know, I think I lived at one point, we lived in Heanor. I think I lived on 1, 2, 3 houses on the same street, all in the space of like 12 months, because they just moved and there was not the money there, and they'd find somewhere else. So so if you imagine living in a very stable home, you know, and I even remember we had a loft that was our playroom, and it was a converted loft in this house. It was a lovely little playroom, and all my toys were up there, and we had our own bedrooms and so on. And then by the time 18 months comes round, and you haven't got that, you've destabilised every single thing that you've got, from your friends that you saw every day, the school that you went to every day, the smells, you know, the pets. I think we had about 2 or 3 dogs at one point going through the house, you know, and they got too much, so they had to go. Yeah, that's where it all went wrong in my father's relationship, and then my mother's relationship with alcohol, to be fair. Because
can you try and psychoanalyze that part of your life and really work out as a character what that was doing for you then, looking back at yourself?
I learnt to cope. So I had some strong coping mechanisms. Grief for me and the sense of loss was second nature. I used to do some training and the old CWDC stuff for foster carers and about grief and loss. And for instance, if you remove a child from its parent, that child doesn't just lose a parent, it might lose grandparent, aunt, dog, cat, sibling, bedroom, wallpaper, bed, smells, friends, school. The sense of overwhelming loss for a child at that age has a profound impact on a child of that age. It does on anybody as an adult if you lost everything. Yeah. Wow. So going sort of from, you could sort of go into 1989 into 1990, into 91, 92, 93, 94, 95, 96, probably lived in about 10, 11 houses.
Wow.
So everything you lose.
Complete lack of stability.
No
in
stability
any
at
way.
all. The only stability I had was at that point my school.
And that's just something, as a human, we cherish, don't we?
Yeah.
We the stability, having forms of structure in our life. It's nice to have elements where you've got lucidity and elusiveness in it,
Yeah.
but we need structure. That's kind of how we're built and programmed.
Well, they say change is as good as the rest. Well, it isn't when you're changing every 6 months, is
No.
it? You know, that's not healthy at all.
You can't process that
You
whatsoever.
can't process that. You know, my father was you know, he went to prison, he came back, and then he was engaged in alcohol again, you know, and it was just, you never knew which way was up. So as a child, the psychology was to cope and find ways to cope. I laugh, and I was telling my mum a few years ago, and she sort of give me a wry smile. But we'll go on to it. My parents are completely different people now. You know, at one point, I think we just lived on fried egg sandwiches. I couldn't eat a fried egg sandwich now.
Really?
So that's an impact on me.
Fully.
Somebody said to me, "Do you want a fried egg sandwich?" No, I do not want a fried egg sandwich. Thank you very much.
It's done that to you.
It's done
Give you
that to
response.
me. Yeah.
Wow.
But
You don't know what you're missing, man.
Yeah, really. I'll take your word for it. Well, I do, because I lived on them. I already know. I think I built the way I built. So, but in all seriousness, you know, and not having anybody. So, not only did I have that at home, that I also went to school and was bullied because of my parents, perhaps, or I didn't have the right coat. So you learn to sort of go down a certain track in life. And then my coping mechanisms ended up sort of at 15, 16, ended up being substances that were in the 90s. You could get them on any street corner. Your friends would get it, and, you know, you'd be smoking whatever it was, even on your lunchtime at school.
So what would it have been for the younger days? Was it food or?
It wasn't food, no. I think for the younger days, I don't think I settled enough to find a coping mechanism. And I think the chaos, and I sometimes track, you know, I was talking to Jamie the other day on his podcast about, he was asking me how I'm so calm. Well, sometimes in my head, I get that sense of chaos that I remember, you know, we're moving. What do you mean we're moving? You know, and the chaos takes over. I manage it better now, and I manage it quite level. But I think because it was so chaotic, I don't think I was ever anywhere long enough in my head, because I never knew what stability was going to be, to find a coping mechanism. Me and my brother used to fight constantly. Me and my brother hated each other for our childhood. I resented him when I look back, because he was older than me, so he used to just go and stay at his friends. I mean, he lived at his friends more than he was at home, to be fair. And then when he was at home, he'd fight with me, and he was bigger than me, you know. And I always remember him going on the bus from school, and somebody saying, you know, when you get off, your brother's asked the school bully to give you a kick him. And he did, yeah. So I got off the bus down a jitty.
Dude, that got me quite emotional then. I was like,
but that was my brother's way of coping. He couldn't fight back.
yeah.
So what could he do? So his outlet was to challenge me. And don't get me wrong, I think my coping mechanism was to be quite a gobby little shite at that point. Yeah,
But I suppose it was pilot mode, and you just went, I've got to get through this. You're in a whirlwind, and the dust's
flight or
just
freeze.
everywhere.
you know.
Yeah.
So I fought.
And it's go.
Yeah, and it was all systems go.
And then it's confusing for you, not just at home, but you're going to school, and then you're getting treated in such a way, and you've got no escape in essence.
No, none. So you learn to find enjoyment in other things, you know, and that's where I suppose when we did get, although we lived even in that, we moved to Riddins, and I think I lived in 1, 2, 3 houses in Riddins, to be fair, but I learnt that was the most stable point I had. And then somebody, you know, I mean, I was smoking anyway. And my mum offered me a cigarette, I think I was probably 12. And I remember why, I get it, and that started me smoking. So the next step for me, I mean, my parents always smoked as well. My next step for me was somebody, we used to do the Kiddie Regal.
Yes.
Yeah, you know, and you used to have your 2020 Fruits are Limited, but I've never been that engaged with alcohol. I'm not an every night drinker. You know, if I drink, I'd go out at the weekend with friends or something. But then, you know, somebody just, it wasn't cannabis, it was the resin type stuff, and that became a thing. And then it was speed, then it was LSD, you know, and it was I don't know, I afforded it, if I'm honest with you, like it, to be fair, but that was the poison of choice, and that was my coping mechanism. And it was a coping mechanism of a lot of us at that point in time. So when I look back, some of my friends, some of whom will probably see this, to be fair, weren't in the same position, but were in a similar position of not having a lot, you know, and learning to, you know. And I always say, well, there's someone saying about the school bully. Well, and I say to my daughter, the school bully might have issues going on at home that you don't know about, which is their behaviour is an outcome of what they're dealing with. So I always say, be very careful before you label somebody a bully, because they might be being bullied. But whether it be at home by parents, carers, or older siblings, or just their own minds bullying them because they don't have anything and they're trying to sort of find their own way of coping. So yeah, you know, we all did it.
Yeah.
You know, and that was...
So what ages are we here, and how long
15,
is it going on
16 into 17.
Yeah. And basically every week you're on the cycle of, we're going to do this, and plan it all out with all your mates.
Yeah, it was every Saturday.
Yeah.
You know, we knew where we would go.
Religious.
Yeah.
You just didn't know what poison you were going to take that
well,
week.
we did.
Oh,
yeah, but we did.
Yeah.
Yeah, we did. We knew what we were doing. But then it got silly, and it was sort of... I remember being at school, and we would be stoned, going back in off our lunch break, you know. And I'm not proud of it, but these
are the important tales to tell. You know.
And then I always remember somebody handed out some LSD, you know, some trips, as they were known then, and I'd have been 16, and we took it. And then we ended up in music lesson, you know, an hour later. By the time I got home, my mum was aware that I was off my nut at school. So it was, you know, and
was
then...
it strong back in them days?
Honestly, it was...
See some
it was
sights?
It was a good walk home, I tell you. Because I walked from Ripley, because I still went to school at Ripley Mill Hill, and I walked from Ripley and I lived at Riddings.
For your frontal lobe to basically still be putty and have no form to it yet, and you're filling it with psychedelics.
Absolutely, yeah.
But I think this is where we are very close, and commonalities in the term of, we ended up on the farm when I was around 8, 9. And even though that sounds stability, me and my dad used to have a really good relationship. He was a very quite known footballer. Yeah. And he had a job which was working nights for my granddad. So as soon as he gets home, he'll get his boots on. We went out for hours. As soon as we got to the farm, and we had Rat City over here, and it was just a wasteland. Long story about this farm. But I just didn't see him anymore. And I really resented the farm then, because I had no family time whatsoever. And my mum has always said this, always at family parties for some reason, or she gets drunk, but she always says, I never wanted kids. I only had you for your dad. He wanted kids.
Wow, yeah.
And
this is a profound statement.
Yeah, and at a very young age, you don't know how detrimental that can sort of dig its way in.
Yeah.
So I never felt this love or this connection, and I was always sort of seeking it and wanting validation. I'd be going out, and I had eating as a mechanism, so I got quite fat, and I was going to school and getting bullied all the time. So I felt that connection there. And then when you said you went on in life and discovered psychedelics and substances, exactly the same, like being such a lost person, not knowing my position and stance in the world. When I did eventually go and try other things and experience other realities or experiences, it was this moment of, wow, what is this? And I don't think, I never would advocate it, but I fully understand why people reach for other experiences when the one reality they're living in isn't supplying that wow factor. Do you know what I mean?
But it was my family script. So my dad's reach out was alcohol.
I was gonna go into that too. Yeah.
So
yeah.
his reach out was alcohol, and alcohol was more expensive in the 90s than for a 15, 16-year-old.
How old were you when you realised you were fulfilling a family script? Did you ever look back and go, "Oh, my dad did this"?
Probably 32, 33.
Really?
Yeah. But you learn,
Wow.
yeah. So he did that and I did that, and and I just remember sort of it all blew up at school. I got arrested, in possession. We got taken back, and it was really a weird situation, because I always remember signing this thing on the top of my parents' television. I was off my nut, and I can't remember much about it, but I remember them taking me home and me going, "Oh, I'm nearly 17. There's not a lot you can do now." And they went, "Yeah, there is. We're going to take you home." We're like, "Oh, okay." And ended up signing this, whatever it was, on top of my mum and dad's TV, and my dad looking at me. And me and my dad we've never had that relationship, even though he was a nice guy before the bottle really took over. We never really had. We weren't close. I wouldn't say we're close now, but I just remember the look in his eyes was like disappointed in you, and all I can remember thinking, probably for the days after, was, well, "You'll want to talk."
I was just pictured that in my head.
You'll want to talk. You're at the pub all the bloody time. Well, you've got no money for hardly anything because you're spending it in the pub. What did you think I was going to do? You see what I mean? And
that's what I was alluding to there. Have you heard this quote before? But drugs and alcohol are not the problem; they're the solution to the problem.
Yeah,
I love that quote. And both of you there, like what I was saying about realities, and then trying to seek and find another reality.
Yeah.
That was felt with the story script that you built, was what you were trying to do, is escape that reality that just feels so painful and uncomfortable and purposeless.
Yeah, and you have to break that. You have to break that cycle as well. And I think it was those situations with the police and school started me on that. I need to stop this now. I always remember going to see my Dr. Clayton at Summer Coast. And he took my blood pressure and stuff like that, and he just said, "If you don't stop, you're not going to see most of your adulthood."
Really?
And you sort of go, "Okay." I mean, it's probably fear factor, to be fair. Was he? I don't know, but okay. And that sort of started that process of well, and I was very lucky that the school, because they were aware of what we'd done, and what had happened at school with the use of substances at school, and I was very lucky that they didn't just expel me.
Yeah.
They allowed me to finish my exams. And I broke that cycle. I went to work on the fair, which, to be fair, most of the lads on the fair were on something, but I didn't do it. So when I was 16, sort of into 17, throughout that whole sort of 96 period, I was working on the fair, and I travelled with the fair, and I slept in the back of a lorry. But it broke that cycle, because I wasn't around people that I could easily go and get stuff from. So I moved away from it, is what I'm saying.
And to break it, so you went, saw your dad, you got taken to your dad, had this that's the worst feeling in it, the disappointed conversation. Oh, it cuts to a different level. Yeah. And then you had a few days of processing, like, hang on, you're going through that though. I'm just doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
Did he send you to the doctor then?
No.
Was there a point where you felt yourself sort of decaying or struggling?
I can't remember how I got to that point. Most of the doctor's appointments I went on my own anyway. Even as a sort of teenager, I went on my own, and I think it was my mum who sent me, because my mum, even though my mum jumped on the bandwagon of the use of alcohol, that was her way of coping with what my dad was doing. If you can't beat him, join him. She was caring. She's always been a caring individual, and I think she must have pushed me down the line of go and get yourself checked out. And then a friend of mine was doing some work on the fair, and it was like I got out. I just got out.
Okay.
My dad never spoke to me. about at that point. My dad never spoke to me about what had happened. He didn't talk to me. He didn't give me a pep talk. He didn't do anything, to be fair, from what I remember. But I got an option.
Do you think that's because inside of his mindset, he had that thought that you had of, well, I'm no real better in that way, and that's why I couldn't have that conversation with you?
I don't know, to be fair. We've never really spoken, my father and I, about history. My mum and I have had some really deep conversations, as have my brother and I. But my father and I think he's hugged me probably twice in the last 10 years that I can remember, one of which I got divorced, and it was sort of, so those moments mattered, you know, because he never did it then. He never spoke about it. And then obviously I spent months working on the fair.
So
I came off the fair to do my exams, then went back on the fair. So I'd come back the day before, I'd do my maths, then that afternoon I was, go to Cardiff somewhere.
So it's quite a travelling fair.
Yeah, travelled all over the place, yeah.
And what were you doing?
Well, I was just working on the rides, and putting them
up
all over the place, yeah. Putting them up, working stupid hours, getting paid £70 a week, living on pot noodles.
Mate.
But it broke that cycle, didn't it? And the people that I associated with.
There's a different phase in life.
Yeah, so all the people that, and they always say, they used to say, if you're working on the fair, you're either running it or you're running from something. They used to say that.
I was travelling, and I think I did the same.
And
thing.
I was running from something. I broke that cycle.
Yeah.
So when I came back, and I started applying for sort of YTS stuff, the youth training schemes as they were back then, and I got a job. Me and oddly my best friend both went for the same sort of, it was like a spot welding place at Hena, and I got it over him. I don't know how, I must have had the gift of the gab, to be fair, and he was right and stuff. But then again, he now sees it as a blessing, because he went down upholstery route and went off doing his other things, and yeah, I got that, and I started the process of work, and I could have got the bus to Hena and back, but it would have cost me more in bus fares I was earning a week. So I cycled from Riddings to Hena, cold, frosty mornings. My dad was still drinking. I'd moved back at home. He was still drinking, quite heavily. But then blamed me. So every opportunity that he could have an argument with me, he would. The caveat was, when I was sort of 10, 11, 12, 13, him and my mum would spitfire at each other. There'd be war in our house. Usually alcohol-filled war in our house. And I had to listen to that as well as a kid. And, people think, well, their kids are in the next room or they're asleep, they're not affected. They are affected when you're listening to domestic abuse, to be fair. And it has an emotional impact on you as well. So listening to that and wanting to protect my mum, but being fearful because my father was bigger than me then. And then sort of 17, 18, my father would fight with me.
Really?
Yeah, physically fight with me.
Wow.
Yeah. There was always sort of 15, 16. We had those moments where he'd get drunk, he'd push and shove, but then he was drunk and I'd shove back. He'd hit the banister and then phone the police. The police had come out. Bearing in mind, I was a child at the time. My adult father had started a fight with me because he was drunk. And I always remember this copper thing saying to me, well, where's your dad now? My mum was crying in the kitchen. He's upstairs fast asleep. Well, he's asleep now, mate. So if you ever walk around the block, by the time he gets up, it'll all be forgotten about. Oh. Well, that was the police in the 90s, wasn't it? Mid-90s, early into mid-90s. It didn't matter. Now, there'd have been hell to pay. There'd have been a social worker. There'd have been all sorts of things happening. Yeah, and that never happened. So you just felt, well, this is my lot in life. This is how I have to survive. And to sort of 17, 18, now I'm having to survive the onslaught of my father, who had clearly, alcohol had derailed his mental health to a point where he really, really struggled.
There's no rationality whatsoever.
No, and you could tell with him as well. You could always tell the turn. And I always remember one Christmas we lived at the third house I lived in Riddings, and I always remember reaching in. We were laughing and joking and doing something, but there was always that anxiety that this could hook up at any point, you know. And I found a picture, and it was that Christmas, and there's a picture of my dad in the doorway, and he's doing that, and he's got a sweater shop jumper on. And probably half an hour after that, me and him were fighting Christmas Day. And people thought, oh, look, your dad looks well happy there. Thinking, well, half an hour later, I remember that Christmas. And I always remember we were doing something, and he was prattling about. And he'd done something, and I think I just reached in to try and get one of his roast potatoes off his plate.
Oh, wow.
He lost his shit.
Yeah.
And he lost his shit, and it was just, wow.
It's like Lord of the Rings, isn't it? It's been possessed.
He's gone. But that's what alcohol
power.
did. You know, and I've done a lot of study around alcohol and the effects of alcohol on the body and the mind through my career. You know, I'm sure there's more I can read about it. So, looking back, I know it switched, and I know the chemical imbalance in his brain at that point was just not healthy.
And he just bled the ocean dry.
Absolutely. And I always remember, you know, a few months after that, well, probably a few weeks after that, there was just this whole saga of, and I don't even know what it was around. And I just remember him physically fighting me and the look in his eyes. And I spoke to my mum about this the other day. Where we're going to function together, because my mum does a similar job to me, a similar role. Well, not does a similar role, but works in my field, which I'll go on to. And I just remember her, and I can't remember who, I think it might have been my girlfriend at the time, were holding me back. But my father was coming towards me, wanting to physically harm me, and the feeling of powerlessness because I couldn't move. And the look on his face was, I'm going to do you, and this is how it's going to end. And I always remember standing up, and I'm not proud of it. I shoved my mum off me, and I shoved him as hard as I could. Didn't punch him, shoved him, and he hit the where the door frame was. Looked over at me and went, like that. I knew he was faking it. I hadn't shoved him hard enough. Of course, he phoned the police. The police came round. I had to walk around the block again. And he went, you know.
Wow.
But that was my childhood, you know. And the people out there, they look at me and they, you know. And I
just love that that's the procedure is, right, go on, round the block.
But that's how it was. How it was. I mean, I'd have been 17, 18 at that point. It was like, go now, walk around the block, you'll sleep it off. You know, and you think, bloody hell.
Yeah.
And that's how my life was. And then I learned to stay clear of him when he was drinking. And I can't do this anymore. I'd broken my cycle.
Yeah.
I needed to break that cycle too. I needed to break the cycle of re-engaging in that type of behaviour, because it was destructive to him and my mum and everybody else around him.
But why do you, that individual, because so many people stay in their cycles. They just decide this is what life is and play the role and become part of that story. I do feel you're quite an anomaly in that way. That's not a normal way of being. I've seen so many people, and working in the community now and listening to the stories and hearing their acceptance to, well, this is the way it is. There's such a common used phrase, but you didn't accept it. No. I mean, you went up to a certain age, but still at 16, 17, 18, we were around here to say, no, I'm breaking this cycle now. I'm going to break another cycle. I think that takes some doing. So do you know how you chose to go about that? Did you just go and fight and flight and just go, I'm just doing it. I don't need you anymore.
I think I'd had enough.
Yeah.
I think I knew what life could be like. And don't get me wrong, I've made mistakes in my life, but I knew what life had been like. I was old enough then to still remember a time before. I
suppose, yeah, because you had that sort of period of time, didn't you, where you could reflect back and you have nostalgia to go towards. And I had
family who had made a success of, so on my mum's side, because my dad was an only child. On my mum's side, she'd got, siblings, and my aunt and my uncle, and they were making it, so my cousins were making it, doing what they were doing, and I just didn't want it, and I can't, as I broke that cycle and then came back, and then I was putting myself through college. So I was going to college every day and getting up, going to college, and I was in a relationship, which I enjoyed, and I just thought, I don't want to be in this cycle where. And I used to call it the bubble. So where we lived at that time was like a bubble. You could drive out of it and then drive into it, and everybody was doing the same thing that they were doing yesterday, and everybody was, and I just didn't want it, and I genuinely didn't want to be in that situation.
And there's
so
two beautiful things you said there. You've seen other, and then you also saw people around that inspired you and did other.
Yeah. So I worked with a guy, and he, as much as he'll never take credit for it, I was mentored to a large degree by a guy called Chris, that I met via a sports thing that was happening, and I won't go into too much detail about how that came about, but and he just had this ethos about him, and he still does now. I mean, I hadn't seen the guy for about 10 years, and I bumped into him coming out of a toilet while my head of service was behind me, and it was like, this guy comes out and just hugged me, like some random guy comes out of the toilet, mate, and I'm like, it was such a moment, and I've spoken to him since we've been out for coffee, but he had such an ethos of his life, and the people so I was at college and I was learning. Whereas I'd probably given up on learning to a large degree when I was at school, because I was doing other things. I was protecting myself. Knowledge didn't mean anything to me at that point. Because,
where are you going to get with that?
Yeah, everybody else is getting it via this, But I was learning, and I was learning quite exponentially about life and about me, and watching this guy and how he interacted with youth, including me, and then how he helped me to mentor youth. I was a mentor at sort of 18, 19 of 15, 16-year-olds. Well, I was a kid myself, but taking a lead from somebody who had just got this ethos about him. He's a South African guy. He'd come over a few years before. He had quite a large family. And I used to, and to a point, Mike, where I ended up mimicking him, and it was a running joke with some of my friends. I used to walk up to him and he'd go, "Hi, James, how you?" Right. So for years, I'd say to people, "Hi, how you?" I'm not South African, but
you
that's
nailed it,
but that's how it was, and that for me, I wanted to be that person. I didn't want to be my dad. And that's
you finally had a figure to look towards.
Yeah, and I didn't, and I suppose him and a couple of others. So there was a tutor at college, a guy called Ian, who I just looked up to, and they were strong characters, but they were balanced in their own different ways. They were balanced, and they showed me that by virtue of being themselves, that there was something else.
Wow.
And that's how the springboard came into doing what I do now.
Oh, mate, we're good at podcasts.
We're doing all right, aren't we?
We're good at this. The way of conducting. I was just wondering, of any other things they exhibited, would they go out their way to make every moment quite profound and give life lessons in every sort of encounter? Or would it also just be simply playing and simply being themselves, and you kept looking up towards that?
I think it was the male figures I had at that point in my time. So there was my grandfather on my mother's side. He was a very Victorian man, but very P's and Q's, thank you. And, he would give you a clip round the ear. Really nice guy, to be fair, but very, 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 very Victorian in his approach, But I loved the bones off the guy. I mean, he was around till I was 26, So I had him to look up to, but during the turbulent years, that side of the family, and I've had to come to terms with this as well, and I talked with Jamie on his podcast about the carpet effect. Everybody knew what was happening. In that side of the family, everybody knew what life was like for me as a child. Perhaps they didn't understand it, wanted to not know about it, and they lifted the carpet and they shoved it under and they put the carpet down, and I was just left to my own devices.
It's easier to do that, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. So seeing people like Chris, he listened. He didn't just, he was, every comment he made wasn't a throwaway comment. And he was a man of substance. And I don't mean substance, he didn't have a lot of money. It's not what he was about. He was about reinvesting himself and his family, because his kids would come to the sessions that we were doing and stuff like that. Reinvesting himself in those around him who he thought he could influence positively in one way or another. Similarly with there was Ian and Steve, who were at college. They were my tutors, and they did the same. You know, they always had these sayings as well. You say, so Ian would say, do you want a piece of chocolate, or do you want a Mars bar? I'm going to go, don't get a body like this eating Mars bars, James. You know what I mean? That stuck with me, which is why I now say those sayings. And Emily will say, do you want this? I go, you don't go for eating like this. But those people influenced me at a point in time where I think I was probably, I probably wasn't emotionally as old as, in certain ways, as old as my chronological years, because I'd probably regressed slightly, because I was a year later going to college than everybody else, because I went welding, and I was doing that job. So I kind of regressed back, and I just started to soak up all that I had probably been lacking. And it just punched me into a place where I wanted to do for others what was never done for me. And
because you'd done drugs and substances before, but I get the same feeling with drugs and substances. It doesn't really fulfill a spot, does it? It might for a very short period of time. You go, oh, look at this. But when you truly meet somebody in the story that touches you in the heart, and you go, oh wow, and you find a passion and something that means something, you find your meaning, find your purpose, that's a different feeling. That's a totally different feeling.
Absolutely totally different feeling. And it just makes you want more for others. Not necessarily for yourself, to be fair, although you always strive to be better. And we talked before we press record. You've got to learn, otherwise how do you grow? But I just remember doing these sessions and watching the kids play. These kids who do, some of them would walk over the gravel car park to the sports session with shoes hanging off their feet, things that didn't fit them. They hadn't eaten breakfast, but they looked up to you and liked you, and they had a bit of rough and tumble with you, because some of these areas, where I was from as well, was a bit rough and ready, but they looked up to you, and you needed to be better for them. And you might have 30 kids in a session, and if you make an impact on just 5 of them, that's a success, isn't it? Because you can't please everybody all of the time, can you? So just even having 5 kids who stuck back and wanted to talk to you, you learnt a lot about them and their struggles, which was similar to mine in some way or the other when I was that age. And then you learn a lot about yourself. So I was learning from the top. So I was learning from these guys who were sort of mentoring me, and then I was learning from the kids who I was around and I was mentoring. So I was just a sponge at that point in my life. I was just a sponge. Without that, who knows where I'd have been, to be fair. But I needed to break the cycle. And the stars aligned. And it just happened the way it happened, to be fair.
This feels like a powerful part of the conversation. So you say it was like a springboard. What happened then? Where did you go?
Well, I was mentoring, and then there was, because at the time there was so much funding around, National Lottery funding, Sport England funding. So you're talking at this point going into 99, 2000, 2001. There was so much money for disaffected, as the term was there, disaffected youth and community stuff. There was millions and millions of pounds knocking around. So I was quite fortunate that I I was doing these sessions. Coming up for finishing college, and I went for a job, and I actually went for the job. There was 2 jobs going on, 3 jobs, 2 at Amber Valley and 1 at Derbyshire Police. And I went for one. I got the Derbyshire Police one, which I thought, oh, bloody hell, I've got to get to Derby every day now. And then I was in and around police officers who were seconded to do stuff, and I was working as the community type, and I was it was a Positive Futures program as it was then, and I was given the opportunity to mentor sort of young offenders and those on the verge of reoffending in Derby City, in some really hard-hitting places in Derby City. The I won't name them, to be fair, because people might watch it and go on from there. But people will know. And it moulded who I am. And like I say, I think on over a 6-month period, for the first 6 months, I think I had 10 young people I was mentoring, and I think I had success for 3 or 4. I know you're not talking. So I would also teach. I was trained to teach the Community Sport Leaders Award program, which was a leadership which helped them get into college if they hadn't got any qualifications. So we was delivering that to them, and they were going off to college, and it had some real successes, some not so much successes, and some quite sad stories, to be fair. And that taught me probably as much as the successes that I had. And but again, I think what ran alongside that was, because I had the history that I had, the Derbyshire Constabulary sort of, I think 2 or 3 times. I always remember being on this Beeler Award, which is a basic education leader. It's an outdoor award. It's a summer award. We're doing it in the middle of winter, in between Christmas and New Year. There was snow on the ground, and we were hiking in the hills, orienteering, blah blah blah. We were learning to teach other people it, basically. I always remember we stopped, and everybody said, right, well, just hang on here. And the DI, who was in the detective inspector who was running the show, he arrived in his car, bizarrely, and then this helicopter landed in the field. True story, this. And East Midlands Today came over and wanted to interview me, because I was a kid who had done drugs and had been naughty and done all this sort of stuff, and I was now doing this thing, and I didn't want it. I'll be honest with you, I didn't want it. I was a bit sort of, and then that happened. I remember being at Dragon. There used to be Dragon Sports Centre in Derby City, and I got back into doing martial arts. I did that as a younger kid. I got back into martial arts. I've been quite successful at it, to be fair. And then can you come to be at Dragon's Elf Club? So I can't remember what time. I was like, yeah, I can do, yeah, because East Midlands Today are coming out to interview you again. And there's a segue of me kicking and jumping, kicking and punching this bag, and then I'm being interviewed about the work I'm doing to mentor young people.
Wow. And
it was such a bizarre, and I met Princess Anne. That didn't go very well. Sorry, Princess Anne.
Oh, mate.
I corrected her. Don't ever correct royalty.
Really?
Ever. My mum's got a picture of me shaking Princess Anne's hand at the opening of the headquarters in Derby City, the new one. Oh, it's not new now. And I corrected her. Well, I didn't correct her. She said she was looking for a word. She was trying to describe ownership, is what she was. The word she was trying to find was ownership.
Okay.
And as she started, she was going, and it gives them a sense of, and I went, ownership, like that. And she went,
oh.
And then just walked away from me. And there was this huge buffet that was going off on the top floor.
Didn't
and
go so well.
And as I walked to go up, I thought, hey, smoked salmon buffet. my boss went, you need to leave. You're not allowed up there. You idiot. But I didn't know. What do I know about talking to royalty? Do you know what I mean? I grew up on social housing estate. Yeah. What do I know about talking to them? So
you did the right thing in my eyes, mate.
But it was this whole world of what's happening.
Yeah.
And at the same time, so I was going from one extreme to another. Yeah. And then I decided I didn't want to do that anymore. I didn't want to be this sort of this mule. I hated it. People are saying, "Oh, you're a helicopter landing in the field to interview you." I hated it. I didn't want that. It's not what I want. Yeah. And I just thought, no, I don't want to do this. So then I went and I thought, do you know what? I want to do something else. And I got sports qualifications as well. So I went to be this active sports thing for Derbyshire the Derbyshire and Peak Park Sport and Recreation Forum. It's Derbyshire Sport now. Probably should have been called that at the start, to be fair. Try putting that on a badge. And I hated it. It was very corporate, and we had to wear these green tops and these blue shorts. And don't get me wrong, I still had some of the mentoring stuff going off because I did Derbyshire Youth Games and we did the Adventure Youth Games at Carsington Water, so I was still interacting with kids like that. But then I was sitting in this corporate mire of the Swimming Association or going to Soho Square because I was trying to develop girls and women's grassroots football in Derbyshire, and sitting with the FA. And yeah, it was great. And you think, I got here off the back of my history, so I was very fortunate in that way. But I hated it. I disconnected from what I wanted. I disconnected from the Chris's and the Ians and the Andys. You know, there's my boss at Derbyshire was called Andy at Derbyshire Constabulary, and I was with the corporate, and I hated every single minute of it. So I left, and I decided I wanted to go and work with young people again. So I applied. I never even considered applying for a social care job. And I got it. Huh. And when she rang me and offered me the job, her name was Liz, and she rang me and offered me the job, and I went, you must have gone down your list to get to me, because I flunked that interview. And she went, actually, you did really well. The way you talked about young people and working with families and the work that you've already done, we think you'll do all right. And that the rest is history. And now I sit here now.
Okay. Just diving back in a little bit, something you said, and it pricked up my ears. Could you tell me some of your best anecdotal moments, and even the worst, and what you learnt from the worst? Because a lot of people don't go to when they've had tough times with kids and what it taught them. And that'd be really interesting. But I'd love to hear some of the moments where you've seen them excel as well, and what happened to you.
Yeah, so I ran this. We was running a Community Sport Leaders Award. It was up in the north of the county, and I went to pick up 3 of the young people that I were mentoring. So they'd have been they'd have been 17 young offenders, you know, and we were in the back of my car, driving up the A38 up to the north of the county so we could run this Leaders Award, and you could see them in the back. There was 3 of them. I don't remember them. I feel bad now because it was Michael, Ashley, and I think his name was Dan, something like that. And the fear in them. They knew each other because they were from pretty much the same street, you know, and they were the sort of gang type stuff. But I took them under my wing, and I just remember that. So I put the radio on, and one of my friends, we went and did a road trip in October as well. So we used to tape, you know, it was a CD then actually. Put this CD on, and just started singing along. And there's these 3 tough nuts in the back. You call them roadmen today, wouldn't you? And they all sat in the back, you know. And it was a very diverse back seat. I might, I'll just tell you that. And I started singing, and I just thought, you're either gonna love me or hate me for this. But I just started singing. It must have been Sweet Caroline or something like that. And they started singing.
No way.
They going up the M1, and they started singing. I got the sunroof because it was summer. Got the sunroof open. And they just started singing along with me, and they just relaxed. Right. So when we got where we were going, and there were other people, because the age group for a CSLA was 16 to 65, basically. You could be a leader at any point, but it was a sport-based thing. And when they got there, they then moulded themselves back into this. I've got this front, and I'm going to be this. I'm not going to let anybody near me, and I'm not going to partake. I'm not going to get involved. I always remember sitting at the front. Stood at the front and the old flip chart writing down, you know, this is how you do a lesson plan if you're going to coach or mentor young people. And then we went into the sports hall, and I just said to Ashley, who was the biggest and probably the ringleader of the 3, to be fair, probably the ringleader out of most people in that area. And I just said to him, you know, and gave him the basketball. I says, you can run the warm-up. And he shit himself. You know, this is somebody on the face of it would absolutely annihilate you as look at you. And he fight, flight, freeze, you know, and he froze. And I'm going, what's up with you? And I tough loved him a bit. And I went, what's up with you? And he went, mate, you can't do this to me. And I went, just get out there. I says, you've got sort of 20 people there, so you've even got an even number. You haven't got to have 2s and then a 3. You've got an even number. Just get out there. You know this. I've talked you through this many times. You've seen me do it many times. I'm going to stand over there, mate. If you need me, I'm there. After about 2 minutes, he was on fire.
Really?
He was absolutely brilliant. And he went from this very robotic into this smile of ease, and this whole interaction that he was having with people who are older than him. Some of them working professionals who wanted to do that as a sideline, and there he was, giving it his all and organising people. And I think that gave him a sense of, not control. Well, probably, re-control, because he lived most of his life out of control, to be fair. So to know that he was
Pride
being
as
listened...
well.
Yeah, pride, sorry.
Yeah.
Pride, sense of satisfaction, achievement, all those things. And he nailed it. He nailed it. I let him go for 20 minutes instead of 10, to be fair. They were knackered. I was knackered watching him.
Really?
But then we got Michael up doing it, and he did the cool down. We ran the session. They did the cool down.
That's the thing, though. It's when
But as he
one
walked
sees
past
the
Ash,
other,
Ash was like, behave yourself, I did it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's not the terminology you use.
Yeah.
But he was like, pretty much, behave yourself. And Michael did it, And the nice thing about that is, Michael's mum works in the Into Centre, and I'm 20 years on now, 22 years on from doing that session. And she still remembers me coming to her house every week and talking him out of whatever it was he was thinking of doing. Even now she recognises me, and I'm a lot heavier and I've got a grey beard. But she still talks to me, and she still says, I don't ask about him because I kind of know what he went on and did, so I won't ask, I won't put her in that position. But to know that I had an impact on that family was fantastic, and those moments were. I always remember taking Ashley boxing to Dragons, and he wanted to spar with me. And I was like, mate, I'm not, I was only been 21 at the time myself, and so he's 17. I'm thinking, God, he's gonna, and we had a really, and it was he wasn't trying to take my head off, and I wasn't trying to take, and we got this camaraderie, because I wasn't that much older than him. Got this camaraderie that was just so special that I had so much time for him just for being him. He didn't need to prove anything or do anything to get my respect. Just being there and trying, he'd already got it.
What would you say to people working with young people? Because somewhat of a naivety, and I've had this, is when you're working with them and then you have these beautiful pivotal moments and anecdotal moments, but then you hear them to go off and do unsavoury things and something happens. We can put blame to ourselves and think, I should have had more moments like that, or I should have done more. How do you sort of, again, rationalise that thought process?
You are one aspect of that person's life, regardless of their age, and you will come in and out of people's lives at any given point where they're being impacted by so many other things, pulls, grief, trauma, all those things, and you can only do the best you can do with the time that you've got with that person. And the hope is, and this is the social sciences aspect, isn't it? This is working with people, not just young people, is you can only hope that I could only hope that the impact I had on anybody that I've ever mentored when I was a mentor was as impactful as what Chris had on me when I was that age. And the stars aligned for me, as I said. There were so many things, college, breaking the cycle, being around people and wanting it. You spend 2 hours a day with somebody, you can start to affect a decent amount of change, both in terms of their psychology, their coping mechanisms, the way in which their outlook, their reactions, but you can, if you're only able to spend 2 hours a week with them, you are what the work that you're doing is diluted by so many other aspects, which at that time in that area was just too much, you know. And it was I learned, because he dropped in the end. He dropped off, and then I learnt that he'd gone off and he'd done something quite significant, and it was very sad, because I did internalise that. Should I have spent more time? That's the only time I had available, you know. But I just hope that the sort of 6 months I spent with him for a few hours a week and training him and doing whatever to do whatever had some sort of impact, that chronologically, as time's elapsed, he's got something from that, you know. And I'll never know, because I wouldn't know how to, unless I go and ask his mum, of course. I wouldn't know how to ask him.
But that's the case, isn't it? What is learned and what is taught are very different things. You can feel, oh, it was this moment that was the significant thing, but he might really later down the line, after you've been through enough pain, enough tenacity, enough of life's problems, to reflect back to, hang on, when is the time in my life where I actually felt full, where I actually felt somebody gave a damn about me? And it'll be in this timeline. And it's like, well, what was that? I feel people will reflect at some point after enough of the shit to get to a stage where they go, oh, here it was. So you can go as far deep into it and as far down the line, but they might just not be ready yet.
No.
And you know that, what's that saying? When the student's ready, the teacher appears.
Yeah.
And, you know, you were here, maybe down the point where you surrender and you put down your arms, you reappear as the teacher, and it's like, oh, that guy, okay, let's touch base even.
And I have to respect that some of those young people being on that scheme had to be there.
Yeah.
Because it was either that, or else they were off down the Swanee, you know, and they were at Her Majesty's pleasure, you know, and arrested every 30 bloody minutes, you know. So some of them had to be there, and some of them wanted to be there.
Yeah.
And some of them had to be there. But I found that probably those that felt that they had to be there probably got more out of it, if I'm honest, because it was a shock. What did they think it was going to be?
Yeah.
They thought I was going to sit in front of them with a clipboard and try and dissect them. And
what they've probably had all their life, really.
Yeah, and that's not what I'm about. You know, I'll learn as much from, and I always say this, I'll learn as much from you as you will from me. I say this to my staff. You know, I'll learn as much from you as you would learn from me, because I think I would do them and me a disservice if I wasn't learning. A day without learning is a day wasted, isn't it, Mikey?
I love in that anecdote there, you got two parts of it though. You got the beauty and the pain in the same student there. In terms of lessons, here's how great it can feel, and then also here's a lesson I learned from the not so good side of it and how it feels. But that's powerful.
And I think and the job, because obviously I went on and worked in child protection and children in care services. I think if I didn't feel a sense of elation when something's achieved, and then a sense of significant loss when reflection when something quite sad happens.
Yes.
I think if I ever was to get away from those emotions and be numb, I'd stop.
You're not in the right place.
I wouldn't do it. I think you have to celebrate the successes, but you also have to understand the losses, to be fair. And you know, there's always learning in everything that we do in our life, and my job is no different. Regardless of what level you sit at and what you do, you know, you will have those moments in a day and every day in my job where you'll go, yes, thank you. And then you'll have those moments where you're going, you know, and you start to tear up. And I think if you hardened off to that and you're working with people, you're in the wrong job, in my opinion. Yeah.
Do you feel, with the journey you had of both sides, of having the archetypal to start with, childhood, to becoming a shit show and a collapse.
That's one thing. Yeah.
But you'd seen both them worlds.
Yeah.
That really helped you in dealing with such a variety and diverse crowd of different young people. Was that a factor that because you'd seen the both, it's helped you relate to both?
It has. And I have had some, like I say, I've had some really good successes in my career, and I've had some really significant sore points where, I've not slept and I've not eaten because, just the type of work it is. I also think that there creates this arc of always wanting to try and fix people as well. And that doesn't work either, because some people don't want to be fixed.
No.
And I've done that in my personal life and I've done that in my professional life. What works for one doesn't work for the other. And and I'm a big believer in people, like you say, people will get there when they're ready to get there. So I've gone through I think in my career, I've known and learnt quite early on who's and which is ready, and there's always been another aspect. So if I've gone to work with a family, for instance, and they've not been accepting of it, there is another way of fixing this for that kid, whatever that might be. But when it comes to your personal life, you can't do that. And I spent probably most of my 20s trying to fix my family. And that caused me a no end of upset, if I'm honest, internal sort of confusion. It's especially in my early 20s, because I just thought I could fix everybody, and I can't, and I'd be very arrogant to think I could.
Is that one of your biggest lessons then when dealing with young people, in not going in with the approach of I'm going to fix you?
Yeah,
it's going in with the approach of listening and giving an objective sort of truth to that.
Yeah, and that's what that's why I've always applied, which is why I think and I don't want to come across as being sort of arrogant, but I've had some real successes in my career. I don't think any manager I've ever had or anybody who's ever worked with would know me to be anything other than who I am as in my professional life. I've never. I don't think I've ever let anybody down, and I've always been that person, and I've gone over and above, and the extra mile, as we call it, to make sure that people are safe. Naively tried to do that in my personal life, and that is probably the biggest lesson that I've learned, because as I said with Jamie Booth, feeling sore about it and not having the same success in working with family and becoming this quite animated person at times, just gave them a get out of jail free card. It then became about my behaviour rather than, because I get really frustrated.
Yeah.
Why aren't you doing this? Why are you still doing that? Let me do this, this and this. And they weren't ready. They weren't ready. And there came a moment where they were. And I spotted it. And I saw an opening, and I went for it.
How so then?
I was sat at work, and I was living up north with my partner, and I was sort of estranged, not estranged fully, but estranged from them. I'd go and visit them, or they'd come up for a party. I wouldn't really interact with them too much, family, because it's just, I knew where they'd be. I always knew they'd be at the pub, even though they were living in the city at this point. They'd moved again. They were living in the city, in the suburbs of the city. I always knew where they'd be. You always knew if you rang them. You always knew. I can tell when my parents have had a drink on the phone easily. You always knew. So you just stepped back, and then something happened, and somebody needed looking after, and I just thought they'd do it. And I won't go into too much detail because obviously of confidences, but I just know that we'd known these kids since birth, and I knew if anybody could look after her, I knew my mum and dad would, and I knew that would give them a purpose. And it did.
Fucking hell, mate.
Well, it did. It was it was hard because I had to be really honest, because they go through assessments and stuff like that, because they're foster carers. They have to go through these assessments, and I had to be brutally honest about my childhood. But it didn't stop them, and they stopped drinking. They have done some absolutely wonderful work over the last sort of 15, 16 years with young people. To a point where my
look, he's gone here.
don't start
You
crying.
bastard.
But I sit in meetings. I mean, just the other week, my mum picked me up to go to a meeting that we were both at. I was there for my role. She was there for her role. You know, so going from 20 years, 25 years ago of not really interacting and things being really hard, to have those, to know that they had a sense of purpose, and that would bring about change. I'm so proud of them. You know, I really am proud of them.
Wow.
My dad is still a cantankerous old man.
Yeah.
I mean, he's coming up for 80 now. You know, but I don't remember the last time I saw him with a drink in his hand. My mum's the same. My mum had probably a glass of wine with me at Christmas.
How many years are we talking there from away from alcohol?
2005.
Fucking hell.
Yeah.
Wow.
2022 now.
Wow.
Yeah.
And it was immediate. It
Wasn't
literally-
immediate. No, it was a slower process. But what happens in those situations is when you become responsible. So 9 times out of 10, if you're a responsible parent, you're not going to go to the pub every day because you need to be a parent. And at that point, I knew that they'd do it. I knew that they'd do it. There was a bit of resentment from me for that, because they didn't do that for me, but I knew that they would do it at that point in time, and I don't know what.
Why?
I don't know how. I don't know how I knew that.
So
My mum said it to.
it was like this innate feeling.
Yeah, and she said, you know what? She said, because we had to introduce ourselves, and I introduced my role, and then my mum sat next to me. It's a really bizarre moment because my mum sat next to me, and she went, and I'm such and such, and yes, we are related. And I'm like, God's sake, Mum. I felt like a kid.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I'm like, there's this huge hall with all the directors and everything there, and I'm sat there in my role, and then there's my mum going, and she said, I was going to tell them it was you that got me into fostering, but I didn't, because I don't want to put you in that position. And I just felt that sense of, it is what it is, you know, and they've done some fantastic work, and have been, you know, and to go from what I remember to hearing and seeing what they do, and the I mean, I always remember being in court with a case, and this solicitor who I'm quite friendly with, who used to work with me on casework, and I'd not seen her for ages, and she came over, she went, I'm glad to see you. How's your mum? How do you know my mum? Oh, we did this work together, you know, she's fantastic, isn't she, Mum? And how's your dad? He was a bit poorly last time. And just to hear that they'd done that, because they won't tell me everything that they do, because it's none of my business, to be fair. They've got confidentiality in what they do, of course. It was just profound, because somebody that I work with also work with my parents on something, and they do, and they put as much effort into, and it kept my dad young as well, to be fair, having these kids running around the house. But they put as much effort into changing the lives of the young people in a different way than I do it now. But they do put as much effort into changing the lives of young people as I do. And yeah, it all worked out in the end, Mikey.
That really, I don't know how much I've been got by a story before, but that got me very strong.
It's a true story.
Man,
it's a true story. They'll tell you themselves.
What
a
full circle though. And I was just wondering, in the psyche there, do you feel for your mum and dad it was a bit of we get a second chance at this parenting business that we didn't quite live up to?
Probably there's some of that in there, and I think if they did it purely for that reason, they would be doing it for the wrong reasons, because you know you have to have an overwhelming urge. You have to have an overwhelming urge to want to change the lives of somebody, to start to change the lives of somebody. but regardless of how small that is, because if you haven't, what are you doing it for?
Yeah.
So I think there might have been some of that.
You do not think sometimes things can start on not the best ground, but then work its way to a really healthy ground?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. I do think that. But like I said, everything starts somewhere, doesn't it? You know.
I just still, we'll one day work out what that moment in you was like. It's their time now. It's ready.
I remember where I was sat when the information came in.
I need to know what that moment
and I just
was.
remember exactly what seat I was sat in, where I was sat, and it wasn't too far away from here, to be fair, in the offices that we were in. And I just remember sitting there going, I know that name. And they went, well, can you think of it? Yeah, I can think of 2 people that do that. You know?
Oh, dude, that is.
And it was, and everybody, and it just snowballed from there. And I made the call. And I said, "This is
clip out bits of this podcast and that one." And I also now I save them in little folders, like my favourite ones.
Yeah.
And I'm saving this clip. I just love it. The whole story is such a beautiful
But
story.
I remember putting the call in because I went into the back office and I said, "This is happening. Can you?" And I just remember there wasn't even a second, and it was like, "Yeah."
Oh,
and it was like, right, okay. So, I mean, don't get me wrong, they had to go through what they had to go through, and they had to bare their soul.
Yeah.
Because to be an adopter or a foster carer, you have to go through quite an intrusive assessment, and they have to look into your background. They have to interview your kids. Well, and I'm not going to lie, because I don't do that, you know, and I had to be really, really honest with them, and I felt bad for them, knowing, and they had to bear all. But I think that started their healing process.
Yeah.
You know, and like I say,
it's the only way the process starts, though, isn't it? Laying every card on the table.
Absolutely.
This is how you made me feel. This is the journey you sent me on, and how I processed it.
And my mum will tell you that she's the mother of 2 boys, the surrogate mother of many others. She's the grandparent of and great grandmother now of biological children, but the surrogate grandmother of many others.
Wow.
And they still visit her and she still visits them all of the time. Yeah. And it's just so nice to see. It really is nice to see. And, you know, more power to them. They did the work. Yeah. All I did was think of it and think, okay, I think let's do it. And I think they'll do it.
You put the jigsaw on the table and said, right, there's your jigsaw.
They did it, you know. They've made a real success of it, and long may it continue.
Do you know what, mate? You are so designed for doing podcasts. I'll put that forward to you as well. I did it with Jamie afterwards because he sent me on that journey and turmoil and broke my heart and then rebuilt it, and you done it as well. And I feel. I love the platform and the art form of podcasts. I think they're beautiful.
It's only the second one I've done.
Mate, I'm so proud of you. That is blowing my... I'm a bit gutted that I didn't pop your cherry, actually. I was just 1 week too late.
Yeah.
But still, like, if the roads that you've been on, the avenues you've passed, and everywhere you've been, you've got such a great story and a great way of telling it. You build it up in this great fashion and lead us down a path, and I think you could help so many people having a little platform yourself.
I mean, I've had my tough times. You know, the background that I had, you know, and I'd say now has made me probably overtly sensitive to other things in relationships, for instance. You know, and I've lost a great many things over the years. Just by history, you know, and feeling a certain way and probably being stubborn, to be fair, you know, and I've had to do a lot of reparation work and reflective work on myself, you know, and so it's not all, you know, whilst the theme in my whole life has been what I would consider where I could have gone successful to a degree, you know, and I want to do more for young people. It hasn't been without its heartache. It really hasn't.
You're a human with flaws.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
As all of us, but you're human enough to admit it, which
Yeah.
not many people dare do nowadays.
No.
And, you know, who better equipped to go through all this journey and learn from all those what we quote unquote mistakes, but be able to articulate in the way that you do, and you can help so many people on the path of doing that. I think you should do like a 2-episode, maybe hour and a half long, like story of everything we've just been through,
Yeah.
and more, because you can really go in the trenches. But then you could go on relationships and what you'd learnt from that, and then pick like loads of topics and keep going forward with it.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
just what I'm picturing via all of what we've explained. Is you got to this area in your life, and I thought, oh, you could go down so many avenues there, and all the
Down the
learning.
rabbit warren.
Yeah,
you can.
Mate,
yeah,
you've done a lot with your life.
Yeah.
That the fame thing, you could do an episode on that, because I remember one of my videos once got like 50,000, and I ran to my dad. I'm like, dad, and suddenly then I was going on stages, and Russell Brand got me on a show, and Rizzle Kicks, and all this happened.
Yeah.
But within seconds, I hated it too.
Yeah.
And I just ran away from it.
Yeah.
And then when everyone tells you, oh, you should have done that thing, and you don't regret it, because I know what it would entail to get there.
Yeah.
But also, you have this feeling of, should I though? Should I?
Yeah.
Could I have? And it's not very nice. So that was another thought that I was going. But we would have done about a 12-hour podcast with everywhere. We were able to go with it. So I would definitely say you need to podcast, man. I'd listen every day. Tell me what you know.
But a lot of, but again, you know, I only know what I know.
Yeah.
You know, and I only go off my own experiences. And, you know, and I was quite worried. Not worried. No, I was worried when I said to Jamie, he said, oh, what can I talk about? What can I talk? And I think I said it to you, go easy on me.
Yeah.
Because I also know that some, you know, that I also know that platforms, my opinions, my story isn't for everyone at all. And I know that. And I accept that. But that's why and we talked about what my next venture is wanting to be. Because I do think that my experiences working collaboratively with others, yourself included, can positively impact in some way, not every way, because everybody's different. And to treat everybody equally, to treat everybody the same is to treat them inequitably, because everybody's different.
Yeah.
So, but to have some sort of positive impact,
Create a ripple.
yeah, and
Completely.
like it did with me, you know. And don't get me wrong, you can. What did Bruce Lee say? Drop pebble in pond, get ripple. Well, that ripple, if you drop it once, so on my sort of the way I've been and how stubborn I've been, that's that bank with it. The ripples hit quite early on and didn't go anywhere. But the other side of me that goes off into the ether is the passion for working with families and young people in particular. And that will always be my passion. You know, I don't need, like when they were landing in the field and coming to Dragons and asking me to kick bags and interview me. I'm not about that. I'm about, you know, I'm about doing it on the ground. You know, there are platforms
Where them beautiful anecdotes that you've just spoken of are made.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. I'm really excited to see where we venture, how we collaborate, what happens next. And man, I've honestly got your back for all of this.
Oh, cheers, Mikey.
Such a cool human, and I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
Can
Thanks.
people-
Thanks for having me.
Mate, it's been incredible. We're 2 hours in, and I wanted to go more and more, but honestly, I feel we could work on either episode 2 or even a spin-off where we pick little things. And I know you're doing stuff with Jamie too. All of us have our hearts in the right direction, and I feel blessed to be a part of this community now. I've never felt that in my life. I was always the guy that went off, did travelling, and spoke of my little town in the worst of ways, and it's a shithole, and nothing happens. And then I reflected and thought,
Change it then.
Whose fault's that? Be the change you want to see. If there's not a scene, make a scene. And that's what I'm starting to do. And as you do that, you gravitate to the right people, and I feel that effect is happening now.
Yeah. and like I say, the setup that you've got here and the things you do is absolutely fantastic.
Thank you, man.
You know, and just the anecdotes you were telling me before we press record,
Mate.
you know, and the work that you do, those moments will stick with you and hopefully them forever.
Mate.
And if that has a positive, even if at one point in the next year where they're about to do something and they go, actually, I remember what Mikey said. That's a success.
Yeah.
That one moment.
And you're going to get naysayers all your life, but that really has been my biggest lesson, is just accept it.
Yeah.
Play with your players.
Yeah.
And all the way through this, you know, we're doing poetry and then getting people come down, oh, poetry, kids, and then they have a go at it and they go, that's not poetry. That's fucking sick.
Yeah.
Basically, all it is you telling your story.
Yeah.
Go.
Yeah.
And then you see that unfold, and then that sparks a passion. And there's so much scope within it. So what you were saying earlier, like, I've had people say, what's the point of this, or don't do that, or you've had naysayers. Fuck them.
You're gonna can't please everybody all the time, can you? Yeah.
But mate, if anybody did want to speak to you, felt inspired by anything that you've said today, are you bothering with social medias, or
I'm on it.
You're on it?
Yeah, I'm on it. I don't really do a lot on it, to be fair.
do you think that's going to grow in time? Say if you did start working in the community down here.
Well, that's what I want to do.
Build a bit of a presence up.
Yeah.
Let me help you with that.
Well, I will graciously accept your support, Mikey. Thank you.
You just tell me how to get skinny, get this chunk off.
Yeah, that's good. Right. I'll be breathing in for the last 2 hours.
You definitely know things about the gym I don't, mate.
Cheers, mate.
I'm learning. But okay, so we won't tell people on this episode then where to get to you.
Yeah, no.
No. We'll leave that until you've grown your social presence up.
Yeah.
Awesome. But I'll do my bit then. Guys, you've been a part of the Old Farm Bus, Back of the Bus Sessions podcast. I hope you've enjoyed it. I'm going to leave you on this. I always do and I always will. Just be nice to one another, you beautiful set of buggers. That's all you got to do. Big love for today, man.
Cheers, Mikey.
Thank you.